population, and he had a lot of direct contact with the children. So there was concern that the laws were so old that they needed to be reviewed and looked at to bring it up to date. So, in general fashion for the General Assembly, two identical resolutions were passed. They're referred to as simple resolutions, so that each did not have to pass the language from the other, but it was identical language. That was House Resolution 522 and Senate Resolution 250. And what they did is they created a task force, because the General Assembly, the members thought this was such a important issue, and the issues were so unique that they needed a task force that had a lot of different professionals that worked in this area, that would then look at the laws that we have on the books, which were some cases very old, and to review it and to make recommendations back to the General Assembly. So on the next slide, it talks about the intent of the task force. As you can see, it was to examine, as I stated, to examine the practice, processes, and procedures relating to response to child abuse, to review and analyze the law, procedures, practices, and rules relating to the reporting of child abuse, to hold public hearings, accept and review written comments from individuals. Now, let me emphasize, when we held public hearings, we went across the state, so that we made sure that we had opportunity for different people to testify, members of the public, whether they were in their professional capacity or whether they were volunteers in different organizations, just to talk about some of the experiences that they had, even also to talk about if they had concern with the fact that they made everyone a mandatory reporter. If we looked at other states' laws and things of that nature, I believe at that time, a state close to us, I believe it was Delaware, had just gone into making everyone a mandatory reporter, and they had a lot of problems and issues that they had to deal with. So there were so many people that came and testified and gave their input, very helpful. Also, in terms of district attorneys coming to testify before us to give information of how they had created or set up different programs. In some counties, they had programs just dealing with sexual abuse, child abuse type issues, so that they used their staff in that manner. But then you had the smaller counties that came in and testified saying, of course we don't have the budget available for us to try to focus on those type of areas, but they talked about the things that they did try to do in terms of joining in with other counties and making it more of a regional type thing. Those were the type of things that the task force looked at, received testimony on, and also took recommendations. The requirement of the task force was to have a recommendation that would be then submitted to the General Assembly by November 30th of 2012. And I can tell you that they worked hard throughout that whole time. My summer of 2012 was taken completely with going to different task force meetings. So fast forward to 2013 then, I can tell you that we then spent the whole year and the whole summer in 2013 looking at the recommendations, we meaning the legislative staff, and trying to put them in forms of bills that would be introduced. I do want to point out to everyone that the final report from the task force can be found at the website of childprotection.state.pa.us. It's close to 500 pages long. Looks like some of you have already read it.
Yeah.
It's very long, very detailed, but I think it's very important because it does lay out, it does give the history, all the things, all of the people that have testified, the different documents they submitted. So it was very, very important. And they did an expansion of many areas of the current laws that we had on the record at that time. But since we're dealing with volunteers, I wanted to focus mostly on what they talked about in terms of mandatory reporting for volunteers. So the legislation, as a result of the task force recommendations, introduced two main bills. And I will say two main bills were introduced and passed because there were a series of bills that were also introduced not only by members before the task force made a recommendation, but also by the Senate. What people don't realize is that we swapped a lot of bills in the General Assembly. So it was more of, well, who's gonna get this bill and who's gonna get that bill. And I was confirmed to go to the PUC October 2nd. And at that time, bills were not passed yet. They were passed at the end of that year. But we were hopeful that the volunteer bill, because it was a big issue already in the Senate before the task force, would have been the one that would have been passed. But what was passed and signed by the governor was House Bill 434 and House Bill 435. So my comments will just focus a little bit on those two bills. I know that we have other speakers that are going to get into more detail with that. So House Bill 434 there was a requirement to submit a certificate from the department, and at that time it was still the Department of Public Welfare, changed that to the Department of Human Services, as to whether the applicant is named in the state database as an alleged perpetrator in a pending child abuse investigation. So that's the application, as you see, that comes from the Department of Human Services. Once you receive that application, then you have to submit it to the Pennsylvania State Police. So that's the second requirement of submitting for criminal history and information report or certificate or statement from the Pennsylvania State Police in their repository, stating that there's no information on the applicant. The third type of report, and I put in parentheses, is applicable because in the case of volunteers, as you'll see throughout this, it was not applicable. So I'll spell out, and there will be more information about that as well. But focusing on other licensed professionals, in those cases, especially school teachers, which were already required to have a federal criminal background. So in that case, they had to do all three of them. So there was a lot of discussion in the General Assembly as to whether volunteers, because they are volunteers. Volunteers mostly for nonprofit organizations, churches, things of that nature. You didn't want to prohibit them or put any type of block in the way of them, encouraging them to volunteer. And we knew also that, for employers, you would say, oh, they'll pay for your background check. That would not be the case for nonprofit organizations that are tight with funds as it is. So you didn't want to put that type of block in place as well. So in doing that, there was a lot of discussion, like, this could be $100 and total them all up. Who in the world is a volunteer? You're already using your own money probably for many things as well. You don't want to require them also to do a background check for $100. And then there was the major discussion of how often do you want them to do it? Is it yearly? Is it for every single organization? Even if you volunteer for 4 organizations in 1 year, you have to have every single one of those done, have a background check. And I think that even after the legislation was passed, there was still a lot of questions like that as well. And some organizations, trying to be very careful about it, they would say, we want the certificate that says it's directly for us, which became problematic. Then House Bill 435 talked about providing clarification as to who is required to report child abuse. So in section 6344.2 of the bill provides that this section applies to an adult applying for an unpaid position as a volunteer responsible for the welfare of a child or having direct contact with the child. And once again, the conversation, we went over and over and over different scenarios as to what do you mean by direct contact? Are we talking about, even in cases for persons that were not volunteers but were employees of, someone that had to come in and check your internet connection at the school. They're at the school during work hours in which children were there, and they constantly had, what about the janitor? All those different things were taken into consideration. In addition, House Bill 435 clarifies that the person only has to submit the background check from DHS and the state police. So there's no federal background check if they have a position that's not paid, so it's volunteer. The prospective volunteer has been a PA resident for a period of 10 years. You know, they're saying we've got people that have volunteered in organizations, whether it's Little League, Girl Scout, church organizations. They're known in the community. Everyone knows them, and you're still requiring them to do a background check. Yes?
PA residency requirement. The person is in the military and ordered to come along. Does that interrupt that 10 years?
Very good question. If everyone didn't hear it, if they're in the military and they have to leave for military service, I don't have the exact answer on that. I don't believe that it does, but we'll get back to you on that. I don't want to just give you an answer, and one of our other volunteers may have that more information on that. And then the third thing is volunteers swear and affirm in writing that they are not disqualified from service pursuant to section 6344, or they have not been convicted of an offense under this section. So, as I was stating all along, the concerns with the background check, as a result of the requirement, some people, there was a big backlog. Most people didn't have to have these background checks, and there was a big backlog with the Department of Human Services. They were changing their computer system. They had more and more people also that were reporting instances of child abuse because they weren't certain, they weren't sure, and with that they wanted to make sure that at least they were just reporting it to make sure. And with that they had such a backlog of things, and also the cost of the application, I mentioned that before, were a burden to some people and some organizations, because in some cases organizations were trying to pay for it, but they just didn't have the money to pay for it. So with that, you had Governor Wolf took executive action, which was then followed up by legislation that stated that, number one, because of the backlog and the compliance checks, because there was such a backlog, he was going to waive the cost of the compliance checks. So that you saw later in legislation this year, which was House Bill 1276, and that is Act 15 of 2015, where the General Assembly stated that direct volunteer contact definition, they clarified that, stated that it is defined as the care, supervision, guidance, or control, and routine interaction with children is the requirement for volunteers. So if you have the person that is, you know, you have someone in your church group that knows about the internet and they can go in and hook it up, but they don't work with the kids on a regular basis, you're not going to require that person to go in and have a background check. Also, that the clearances were free, because it was becoming a burden in terms of people also having to pay for all those background checks. And then also the requirement that's a 5-year requirement instead of an annual requirement. And that you can use your general background check for another nonprofit organization. So, you know, because I know I volunteer with several nonprofits, and the year also that I became confirmed, I had to have that done for my job as well. And I thought, those people over there are probably thinking, what's wrong with this woman? She probably had like 4 background checks. Something's wrong with her. So you can use that certificate if you're also volunteering with another organization. And I think that this really is helpful to the organizations, the nonprofits. It makes it easier for them. And I think people are starting to relax a little bit more. Like, okay, we can get a handle of this, we can do this. And they're easing up the requirements or making it easier to comply with the law. So 1276 talks about, also because of the backlog, what the bill said is new volunteers are required to have their background checked by August 25th of this year. So August 25th has passed. So if you've never volunteered and you're about to volunteer, that's when they require that you get the background check. But for those persons that were already volunteers and didn't have the requirement before, they're going to allow them to continue to volunteer. And because of the backlog, they moved it back a year. So July 1st, 2016 is when the existing volunteers would need to have their background checks in place. So that is what I wanted to give to you in terms of the legislative background, but I also wanted to throw in there some different things in terms of, there's also a concern with nonprofit organizations that they have to pay for training and different things like that. Training is not required, technically required, but encouraged, strongly encouraged that you have that, and there's so many different places that you can get that. Just as the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank is providing this for their partner organizations, also other places are doing that, and I've listed some of the websites that you can go to. I also put in the Keep Kids Safe one, keepkidssafe.pa.gov, and then the University of Pittsburgh website, not because I went to school there, but I had to throw that in there. But because the University of Pittsburgh actually has a building on the West Shore that the task force used a lot, because they do a lot of stuff with the child abuse and the reporting and policy issues of that nature. And they have an excellent website that you can go to. You can actually do the online training, which I thought would be very helpful. There's other colleges and other organizations. I know I did just off-road in there. I did the Penn State one too, so.
Very fair.
Very fair, that's right. I did the Penn State one too, because I've done some volunteer things down at the Penn State Harrisburg campus, and their training online is also great as well. And they will give you a certificate, so that organizations, nonprofit organizations that you're with, can say, okay, well, you have a certificate, that's even better for them. It helps them, it gives people more of an assurance that when they're trying to comply with the law, that they have a better understanding. So questions like what was asked in terms of military personnel, if they had to go out of the country, would that impact their residence? I don't think it does. They're still a resident. But I don't want to give you that answer. I think that we'll look at it and we'll get back to you. Okay? And I think that's all I have for, that's all I have for my legislative overview, and I think I'm right on time.
You are perfect on time.
I will stay here for any questions later.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, we're going to send the presentation to Williamsport. Wow. Traveling in a second to Pam Hicks and to Gail Lander. So Pam, is Gail there with you?
Yes, she is.
Perfect. All right. So Gail, I didn't get to meet you in person, just talked to you on the phone. So we welcome you, and you're on, girl.
Hey, thank you. Actually, I just came through Harrisburg on my way back from Virginia.
Oh.
And I'm here, I'm home. So, and I can't answer or address the military question either. That's the first that I've heard that it's a good question. So, I think Gladys gave a wonderful, in-depth, concise overview, and I'm not sure that I will use all of 30 minutes, but my training was with Samaritan Counseling, a faith-based group out of Lancaster County, and it was just about a year ago, in November, I did that. It was pretty intense. It was 20 hours, it was 3 days, and my head was spinning when I left. I did it at a church retreat center that I'm familiar with, and since then there have been changes. In January, there was a change of date. In April, we had the information that clearances were portable and they could be moved from one volunteer group to another, which was a real blessing. And then when I was in Wisconsin in July, got the email about the change of date again for August clearances, and that fees were not required for volunteers. I had already paid my fees, and it was just $20. I've never done the fingerprinting, so I didn't bemoan that. But I think too this will be helpful that volunteers don't have to pay for their clearance fees. So what I did, I condensed the latest update of 6 pages to my 2 pages, I guess, and the series of questions that I summarized are on your PowerPoint. So I think, just start with who needs clearances. And again, this has somewhat been already addressed. But it's all about keeping kids safe. That's the bottom line. So I think when we go into the care, supervision, and guidance for the welfare and safety of children, safety first, and it's a regular or repeated basis. It could be someone in your group as like a custodian who just passes through, but if he's regularly there, you might want to also include him in the clearance coverage. Also want to mention that most groups would have insurance requirements, and it would be good to check with your insurance coverage and that there isn't anything additional needed. And there also can be additional requirements from the groups that you volunteer with. There are several ways you can obtain your certificates. I did mine online, and I have a number to do mandated reporting. It was quite a process because it asked me where I had lived for the last 4 years, which was the same place. But then it also asked me who had lived with me for the last 4 years. And that got very complicated because we housed many students, some of them international, and I had to go back and think how old they are now and where they are, and it took me quite a lot of time. I was asked by someone at another meeting group why a 40-year period, and I really didn't have a good answer to that. I don't know, Gladys, do you know that answer?
No. It was probably negotiated. I don't know.
Okay, all right. I think probably it would be easiest for people that are in a set organization with a group of people that need their clearances if that volunteer agency could do the clearances for them, and they have to be really administered by one person, and they should also be filed and kept in confidentiality. Going to the first slide, the bottom of that about students, it's sort of a bit of an exception. I worked last in a college campus child care center, and all of our students, because they interacted directly with the children, had to have clearances. So for some of them, that was, a delay in their start even of volunteering. Eventually, most of them were paid. But if the student is working in a direct context with children, they should have their clearances. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Good question. If the student's not over 18, no. Okay. However, someone under the age of 18, if they're paid, they could be required from 14 on. And a question of that was asked about babysitters. So, okay.
Yeah, I bet.
The two clearances that are required for volunteers, as Gladys addressed, are the recorded criminal history from Plain State Police and the child abuse from the Department of Human Services. The FBI fingerprinting only if people have not lived in state for the past 10 years, and people who have lived in state for the past 10 years are supposed to sign a certificate of affirming that they have been a resident. I'm not saying that very clearly. I have not done that. I have not been asked to do that. I have a copy of it. It's 3 pages, and it needs notarization. So until I'm asked to do that, I don't think I'm going to do that. To swear and affirm that that I've been a resident and I've not been of any convictions. The certificates that people have been receiving now are going to be valid for almost a 5-year period, but you wouldn't want to wait to the end of that 5-year period to renew it. They say at the end of 57 months is a good time, and in a group setting, you would take the date of the person who has the oldest clearance, and you would start from there and you would renew the clearances. And hopefully there won't be any change that we're now going to be charged for group renewals or something like that. I don't think that will happen. People who have no clearances at all must submit their clearances at the beginning of their service before they start their service. However, they could work as a provisional volunteer for 30 days with someone who is a permanent volunteer. That should be acceptable. The fact that there is no cost for these clearances is, I would say again, very good consideration. And I don't think there were many people that I know of from my home church situation that begrudged the cost. They just felt they were well known, and how could anyone expect them of anything? So that's probably an issue that you would deal with. Or another, some people feel, well, we don't have children that come through our group, just adults. So I don't think the food bank situation, you have people bring young children in. Are they cared for while they're here at all?
If it's below the age of 18, we require the supervisor to sit them. Is that correct? For higher and the volunteering requirements, but I think that's what we want to stick with. There has to be something that we are also mandated. Okay, that we are clearance.
And they would probably be in the presence of their parent or an adult, supervising adult, and you really wouldn't be the one that's primary care. The websites that are listed, American Clearance Certificates via page, the Compass website online is one where you can, you would need your own login number, and then you would be able to go directly, and if you should need to report, that would be the way to go with that. Someone else I know is going to discuss the mandated reporting process. I think that's another issue that people feel very uncomfortable with, probably as much as getting their clearances. When I was teaching, fortunately I didn't have to ever report. There were some positions that I never had to report, but it wasn't my job. I could pass that on to someone else. Whereas now it is individually our own responsibility, and we are not liable. We do not have to divulge anything. We will not be liable if the report turns out to not be true. So it's better to be safe than sorry. Hopefully there will not be more changes in the law the rest of this year at least. But I'm sure coming forward it will be reviewed. Gladys, are there provisions for that?
Provisions for whether there will be change?
For reviewing the current process?
Well, I mean, they can always do it. I don't know that there's any, I don't know that there's any, discussion about making changes right now, since they just went through a couple years of making changes and even made a change this year, so, and right now they're focusing on the budget.
Yeah, okay, well, the grace period has been very well received by everyone I know. And I think too, I don't know of any exceptions for any group for clearances, for any nonprofit that has an exception for their volunteers not to have clearances. And I'm talking about volunteers. Does anyone have any questions at the moment for me?
Will that, I'm in the month of April, or
to redo that, because he's no longer being volunteer, but, yeah, and I'm thinking, see, when I did mine, I'm thinking it would come up now, I haven't checked that, but it'll be.
And then, for, being a food,
Yes, yes. The others?
Yes, ma'am, can you hear me?
I can.
In your in your slides, it mentions several times the term agency administrator. Is that an official position? Does that position need to be designated in writing? Or is that just the person who gets stuck taking care of the paperwork?
Okay, I'll go by our church, I'm a volunteer at our church, and I'm very happy when someone who is a paid employee of the our church secretary volunteered to do that, because I just feel I should have that responsibility as a volunteer. So I think it's best if it is, a paid employee.
But there is no formal requirement for that position.
No?
I
No,
thank you.
other than, the confidentiality.
Okay.
Any others at the moment?
All right, Gail, thank you so much for your presentation, for your part of the presentation. We're going to jump it back here to Harrisburg with Marianne Havlicek for mandated reporting of suspected child abuse.
Is it okay if I sit down?
Go right ahead. Go right
I
ahead.
don't know, I'm
And then
pretty
do you wanna-
comfortable. Okay, how
So
do
you
I?
don't have to- it's just in here.
Okay, that, I'm gonna have you do it.
Okay, that's
I'm quick, right? I'm
That's
telling you,
all right.
When I start talking, keep me on task. Thank you for having me here. I do this mandated reporter training. I went to the training 3 years ago. I probably provided 20 trainings. We are very happy to provide this training to nonprofits, churches, faith-based. This group, I think it's a lot better than the online, obviously, because it's a little more interactive. The new laws that were put in place as of December 31st, I think, 2014. The mandated reporting laws have changed, and there's some things that I'm going to tell you up front I'm not comfortable with, but I have to do it. And the new piece that is a little disturbing, but you have to follow the law. If you are in line in a supermarket and the person behind you discloses to you that their neighbor, Marianne Havlicek, is currently being abused, guess what you have to do? Make the report. The new report, the new law, well, it's always been the law. It is a suspicion of child abuse. You are not an investigator. All you're doing is making the report. If you don't make the report and someone else does, oh, you don't want to be behind bars. So, make the report, whether you're a volunteer, if you have a chain of command, that's fine, but you have to make sure that that report has been made. What role do you play? Could be a hero. We know that children are abused. At our Children's Resource Center on the grounds of the old Polyclinic Hospital, we see upwards of 25 children a week who are being sexually or physically abused. Now, that's local counties of Dauphin, Cumberland. Sometimes we'll pick up Adams or other counties. That's not Williamsport, that's not Lycoming, and that isn't any other county. So, unfortunately, we really do not have a handle on this, but with mandated reporting, we can at least try to get a handle on it. So, I don't want you to feel intimidated or any of the above. All you are doing is making a report. The purpose of the Child Protective Services Law. Encourage more complete reporting involving law enforcement, establish in each county protective services. I really like number 4, which is protect abused children from further abuse. Sort of the sad thing about that particular bullet is we know it does not always happen. A lot of times educators, volunteers, medical personnel say, but if I make the report, it will get worse. That can be true, but what's the alternative? Nothing. It just keeps on going. So we're hopeful that that will protect abused children from further abuse, to provide rehabilitative services, to try to get them connected with services so that if one child possibly might be abused, we're not going to see the rest of the children abused. That next bullet I think is very important, and sometimes it's not that we take that to the next level, but we certainly do want to preserve, stabilize, and protect the integrity of family life, but not at the expense of children being abused. So, you know, it's not even a fine line. If you have a reasonable suspicion of child abuse, make the report. It's all you have to do. No one knows that you, I probably make upwards of 6 to 8 a month. Sometimes I'll get a copy back that says what has happened, sometimes I don't. It doesn't matter. I've made the report, and that's all that's important. Assess the risk of harm and prioritize response and services to children most at risk. We do that at the YWCA, and I'm sure some of you also do that, where we determine where this child falls in on a spectrum of risk. Definitions under the Child Protective Service Law is a child is an individual under the age of 18. Over the age of 18, there is no mandated report. You can do it, but under the age of 18 is where we all fall into mandated reporting. All right, I'm going to explain a perpetrator and an offender. Please do not worry about it. A lot of these things are very specific. You don't have to worry about it. A perpetrator is classified as someone who is a caregiver in the home, a paramour of someone in the home, a partner, a grandmother living in the home, a relative is considered a perpetrator. Don't worry about it. Just telling you that. Next one. An offender is anyone else who commits an abusive act upon a child. That would be a neighbor. That might be a soccer coach. That might be a Girl Scout leader. The reason we break these down, and again, this particular little training is about 1/4 of what I would go over. I think it's just important because some people are aware that in a school situation, even though they will call Child Protective Services, they will call the police first, and that's where an offender comes in. Someone that's a teacher in a school, if you know, we've had some unfortunate incidences in Harrisburg, they'll call the police immediately. The police or a school administrator will also make that Childline report. Don't worry about it, okay? Whether it's an offender or a perpetrator, make the report to Childline. The 1-800 number, you can now do it online. Thanks. An offender could be an adult, a teenager, or a child. Unfortunately, we have made reports on children abusing other children. Okay, it's, you know, it is what it is. So it can be any of those three. I'm going to go over the 9 categories of child abuse. I'm going to go over it relatively briefly because I don't want you here until 12 o'clock, right? But they've also made some changes in these 9 categories. They've added a couple things. First one is bodily injury. The second one is fabricating, exaggerating, or inducing a medical symptom or disease. The third one is serious mental injury. Fourth one, sexual abuse or exploitation. Fifth one, likelihood of bodily injury. Like, gee, if I weren't there to stop that bullet, this child might have been hit. We'll go a little more in detail. Likelihood of sexual abuse or exploitation. Serious physical neglect, specific recent acts of child abuse and unfortunately death of a child. Okay, bodily injury. I think you can ping again a couple. There we go. One more maybe. Good. Intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causing bodily injury to a child through any recent act or the failure to act. I think that's the new part that we're dealing with in 2015 is or the failure to act. It must be recent, within 2 years, to report it. I don't really worry about that. I make the report anyway. If the child discloses to me that someone has injured their back with a belt buckle and there are still welts there from 3, I'm going to make the report. Do you have to? No. It is considered bodily injury when it's substantial pain. It used to be just pain. Now they've put in substantial pain. Also, impairment of a child's physical condition. Child can't walk well. You know, that the arm is bent from being bruised so much that the child can't write, can't play ball, any of those things. Fabricating, exaggerating, or inducing a medical symptom or disease, we call that Munchausen by proxy. And what that is intentionally knowing or recklessly fabricating, feigning, or intentionally exaggerating or inducing a medical symptom which results in a potentially harmful medical evaluation or treatment to the child through any recent act. We get a lot of, I don't want to say requests, we get a lot of complaints of women who are pregnant, who are using alcohol, crack, tobacco. Unfortunately, our hands are tied for an unborn child. There isn't anything we can do about that after the fact. We certainly can and we do, but even through our shelter we know there's some behaviors that are not healthy, but that does not apply to a pregnant woman not taking care of herself. That's also recent, 2 years. Serious mental injury. Intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly causing or substantially contributing to serious mental injury of a child through any acts or failure to act, a series of such acts or failures to act. Now, when I do this with sometimes teachers or faculty, they'll say, you know, those first 4 things are like the first day of school. Anxious, agitated, depressed. And I think the thing on these particular things are, it's an extreme change in behavior. And I'll go through that. I think there's a couple more places. The child that is happy to go to school, but now is fearful to go to school. It's not just, oh, I don't want to be here, I'd rather be swimming. It's, I don't want to be here, I don't like it here. Don't make me go to school, Mom. Or the child that doesn't want to go home at the end of the school day. So it's really I like to say it's a pyramid. You know, if you see a child one day that says, I don't feel like going home. Oh, okay, what's going on there? You don't have to ask questions. Do not probe. Do not make a child tell you something because you are asking, hey, what's going on with you? Why don't you want to go home? Oh, I got in trouble. I didn't take out the garbage. Different story than, I don't want to go home because my grandfather's there and I don't like how he touches me. See the difference here? So again, you're not probing. You don't want to do that, but just what's going on with you? Obviously, the other one, inability to accomplish age-appropriate tasks. A child that can't tie their shoes, 10 years old. A child that also might regress, that might, kindergarten or first grade, may start wetting the bed, may want to wear a diaper, suck the thumb. There are things that are regression, meaning something is going on. This one does not need to be recent. I don't worry about recent or non-recent. I just don't worry about it. One more, okay. Sexual abuse or exploitation. It can be any of these 4 things and then some. I think the second one we see a lot of at the work that we do with sexual assault, and that is sexually explicit conversation on the telephone, the computer. We have a huge problem in our schools, and I don't know if it's in Lycoming County also, but with sexting, with somebody tracking people, we talk about dating violence and a young woman or a young man that gets upwards of 200 texts a day. Where are you? I called you, you're not there. Who are you with? What are you doing? And then that goes into sexting and sexual activity. Obviously, looking at sexual or other intimate parts of a child. It is actual or simulated sexual activity, and also visual depiction, photography, videotaping, all of the above are included in sexual abuse. That does not need to be recent to be reported. These are some of the categories of sexual abuse and exploitation. Obviously, rape, statutory sexual assault, I'm going to get into in this next slide, because the state of Pennsylvania has age laws for children and when they can have sex. You're not going to like this, but I'll tell it to you anyway. But sexual assault, indecent assault, indecent exposure, incest, prostitution, sexual abuse, exposing child to pornographic movies, pornographic magazines, having the child pose, undress, or perform sexual nature. Before I go to the next slide, the state of Pennsylvania says that until you're 13, you can't have sex.
Until you?
Yeah, isn't that something? If
Is
you're
that how
over
they
13,
word it?
well, the state, if you're over 13 and you want to have consensual sex with somebody, it's not against the law. Okay, I know that's maybe hard to believe, but that's how the law states. Statutory sexual assault was not part of the mandated reporter training in 2014. It is now. Statutory sexual assault is another age law, very specific. It says if you are under the age of 16 and you are having consensual sex, both want to do it, both engaging in sexual activity, one is 4 years older and it's to the day, that's against the law now. And it is a reportable offense. Statutory sexual assault. If the 13-year-old is having consensual sex with a 17-year-old, you have to report it. 15-year-old with a 19-year-old, 14-year-old with an 18-year-old. How about two 14-year-olds? Nope, no laws being broken. This one is an age law. I know, it's a little, I know.
Major discussion.
Yeah. I know, it's very difficult sometimes to wrap, 13, but we're talking about consensual. And I'm not approving that. What I'm saying is it's not rape. Rape is a whole different ballgame. The two young people consenting to have sex is not against the law.
Apparently they didn't have children when they made these laws.
Well,
I know.
I can tell you in some of the discussion, there were different nonprofit organizations that were also very concerned that they wouldn't have, and I'll use young women, come to them for services or concerns, if they had something as a result of having sex, if they knew that the person that they had sex with was going to be charged with a crime. So there was a lot of discussion and concern around that, and that's probably how they came up with that.
Yes.
Looking at it from the other direction, are there not splinter groups and small religious groups that allow and encourage you to take a mate when you're younger than 16?
I'm sure there are, and that's
That would
right. But again, it's the age thing. A 14-year-old and a 17-year-old, that's not statutory sexual assault. That's not against the law. That 4 years is, to the day. And we have young people saying to us all the time, I'm not going to tell you. My boyfriend's 19, he's in college, and I love him, and we're going to get married, and I'm 15, and none of your business. I personally am on the fence with statutory sexual assault because not only it's consensual. The problem with statutory sexual assault is the older person is always going to be charged. So if you have a 15-year-old that looks like she or he is 21 and they go into a restaurant and order an alcoholic beverage, then the 21-year-old they have consensual sex, even though that young person lied, false ID, in the restaurant and wherever it is, that older person is going to get charged. And the reason for this law is you should know somebody before you have sex. I'm not going to get into that. You know, that's not part of what I do. But that's really the basis for this law. You know, let's just not. The only time that I was involved in a report of a statutory sexual assault, I happened to be at a medical center, and a young girl delivered a baby at the age of 16, but she had sex obviously at 15. The father of the child was there, who was 21, is going to college. The grandparents, the dad lost his job, the young man was helping in the home, and he went to jail. And that bothered me, because I know the law, I know it was because of some of the family's friends and acquaintances and relatives, he did get out. I was pretty happy when we didn't have to report it. I think it sometimes can get sticky, because it is consensual, and then you've got to ask the age. But now, you must make that report. If somebody says to you, oh, you know, I'm 14 and I'm in love with this 19-year-old, and last night, you know, we had consensual sex, guess who's making that mandated report? I've never had one, I don't think you will, but let's be clear, it is now against the law, but not consensual sex between two age-appropriate children. Yes?
With all of these ages, even going back to the 18-year thing, are there exceptions or modifications for severely mentally disabled?
There are no modifications that I'm aware of, I don't know, Gladys, if you, that pertain to that. We take those very, very seriously. When we go to a hospital for a SANE or a SAFE, you know, a sexual assault forensic exam, and there is a disability involved, I mean, you know, they can be a very vulnerable population, but no differently than a 5-year-old child who's been raped. So, you know, we certainly, you know, take everything seriously, but there are, you know, there are no exceptions, no provisions made that I'm aware of. Unless someone else knows in Williamsport, I don't. A good question. Okay. Oop, back up for a second. I want to not spend a lot of time, but children, individuals who sexually abuse children, are likely someone the child knows and trusts. 93% of the time, 9 out of 10 children know who has sexually assaulted them. When I used to go into schools, you know, and do programming, and I would walk in the classroom and I would say, you know, my name is Mrs. H, and, you know, I'm from the YWCA, and how are you all doing? I'm going to talk to you today about protecting your bodies. Then I say, oh, I got the wrong piece of paper. Who will come with me? But I'm parked not in the parking lot, I'm on Corey Road, you know, a ways away. How many children out of 30 are going to walk out of that classroom with me? 30. Because if they recognize you, if they put a face to the name or name to the face, they feel you're trusted. We teach children to trust us. So I think the stranger danger sort of myth, I think it is a myth, is not really there. We know our children aren't going to go with a perfect stranger, but a stranger to them is someone they've never seen. They've seen somebody for 5 minutes, now they feel they know them. Likelihood of bodily injury. Intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly creating a reasonable likelihood of bodily injury to a child through any recent act or failure to act. The allegation must pertain to bodily injury. Bruises, burns, it's recent within 2 years. Again, that is the law, but if you get a report or somebody, a child discloses and has leftover bruises, there's nothing wrong with making the report. I encourage you to make a report. not to feel you're doing something wrong, but more importantly, you're not an investigator. Let Childline do it. Okay, I think, okay. Likelihood of sexual abuse or exploitation, intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly creating a likelihood of sexual abuse or exploitation of a child through any act or failure to act. The allegation must pertain to sexual abuse or exploitation. Again, recent, within 2 years. The only time and I'm not sure if my supervisor, CEO really liked it, I did confess what I did. Young girl was 14 years old, and she was in a school situation, and she came up to me and said that she had a baby, and she was very upset, and she was likely going to harm herself. And I said to her that I was a mandated reporter. Had she told me the father's name, who unfortunately was her father, I would have had to make that report. It's the only time in 24 years that I up front said to somebody, and I'm not telling you, I'm not encouraging you to do that, what I'm saying is I made the call. I felt she was going to take her life. And even though that happened and that was a mandated report of child abuse, sexual assault, I made the call. That's the only time in 24 years. And I'm not encouraging you or telling you to do that, but every now and then we run across something that makes you stop and think, and you're trying to take into account the welfare of a child. But that's the only time. Okay, serious physical neglect. Serious physical neglect endangers a child's life or health, threatens a child's well-being, causes bodily injury, or impairs a child's health, development, or functioning. Lack of appropriate supervision. It can be one egregious event. What's the law in Pennsylvania for having children stay alone? What's the age?
I was 12 years old.
There's no age.
What?
No, there's no law that says how old a child must be to stay home alone. There isn't one. But having said that, obviously if there's a 2 and a 4-year-old at home and there's a fire and those children are injured, there will be repercussions and there will be laws broken and whatever. But there is no law in the state of Pennsylvania.
There's a law if you leave a child in a hot car, but there's no law that says you can leave them at home.
And I think it's because it's the endangering the welfare of a child. So they're looking at the conditions, and we're talking about child abuse, but there's also general protective services law. So they're looking at the conditions of the home, whether the child is taken care of, and all of that. So, yeah.
And
I'm glad I raised my children all the time.
Well, when I did this, like I said, we've done this training to very large faith-based organizations. And when I said that, I really got questioned by quite a few young single mothers who said to me, yeah, I leave my 10-year-old at home watching the 5-year-old, for 3 hours. I can't afford daycare. I think what Gladys said is very valid. We're not talking about somebody, leaving at 11 at night and going to the local bar and not coming back till 6 a.m. and leaving poor children and the fire starts. So I think the point being, if children are taken care of or whatever, then you're going to have a whole new umbrella of people spying on people. We don't want that. Let's be clear. But those things happen where, there's physical neglect. Failure to provide essentials of life is huge. They've added dental. That's the new point in this year. It's always food, shelter, and medical. Now it's dental. So this particular serious physical neglect is this child does not have food, clothing, shelter, is not given medical, dental. That constitute serious physical neglect. Thanks. Specific recent acts of child abuse. Child abuse also includes these specific facts. There's 2 new things that have been added. Obviously, the first one, kicking, biting, throwing, burning, stabbing, cutting a child. Unreasonably physically restraining or confining a child is new. That means you put a child in a chokehold. You do something to impair that child from breathing. That is new. The next one is also new. Forcibly shaking, slapping, or otherwise striking a child under the age of 1. That's new. Interfering with the breathing of a child, causing a child to be present where methamphetamine is being manufactured and law enforcement is investigating. I know, I hear you. That's a new law. That's a new point here. And everyone always says to me, oh, so if law enforcement isn't investigating, it's okay. I think they added that because of the risk of drug labs around children. And frankly, I'm glad it's there. Granted, law enforcement, from what they tell us, are usually involved in the radar of that home or that facility, so hey, it's in there. Leaving a child unsupervised with an individual required to register as a sex offender. That is not new, but they changed the wording to be a little more specific. If you leave your child with someone that is a registered sex offender, you're going to be, that's a mandated report. Somebody says to you, oh, I like my uncle, but he's on that list, you know, he touched children. There's a report. You cannot leave your child with someone who's a registered sex offender. Thanks. Death of the child, and
We have a question.
Okay.
For police board, I can unmute it. Okay. This one is restraint. Now, those you might have to do with. So, can you not do restraint now? I just wanted to clarify.
No, I know your question, I get that a lot. You can restrain a child. That new specific point is that you are cutting off the air supply. You are restraining a child so that they cannot breathe. Restraining as far as arms and keeping them in control is very different from harming a child like a chokehold. Okay, there's the difference. No, restraining and causing a child to stop breathing are 2 different things.
Confinement?
Yeah, confining is fine also. I mean, well, I don't know about that.
I think the term unreasonable is the key. So, you know, when we have different organizations, I think I heard sometimes you may have to restrain the child. I think you guys even get some type of training in terms of restraining the child. So the term unreasonable is the key.
That might be medical.
Right. Or we had,
Right.
right. When we trained group home staff, they have told us that, you know, and Gladys is right, you get training. We're talking about you're getting angry and you're just, you know, you're giving a chokehold or you're putting your arm up against that windpipe. You know, it's very specific. Did I answer that? Okay.
You did. Thank you.
You're welcome. Reporting child abuse. Anyone is a permissive reporter. Anyone. You're in your neighborhood and you see something you don't like, you are now a mandated reporter, but a permissive reporter, anyone can make a child line report. And you know, I think we've got to get away from that premise of it's not my business, I don't want to get involved. You have everything going for you as a mandated reporter. You can help a child, you can stop abuse, no one's going to know it's you, someone is going to investigate. I will tell you probably 80% of the reports I make are unfounded or possibly indicated. I don't really care. I've done my job to help a child. And, you know, there's no responsibility for you except the good stuff. let someone else do the investigating, let them find out if there's something wrong. And more importantly, again, we call that like a pyramid. Sometimes a family will have 2 and 3 reports. By that 4th report, something positive happens. And we're not aiming at parents, and we want to try to help parents raise children, you know, in a safe environment. But if there is abuse, that's our responsibility. Okay, report can be made by calling Childline. I still use the 1-800 number myself and make a paper copy that has to be turned in. You can also do it online, and I think that comes up down the road. Okay. Yeah, there it is. The thing that I do want to touch very briefly on is that I want to caution you, and however your chain of command is, that's fine. I make all the Childline reports with the YWCA, as does anyone else. We don't have a central reporter. What we do have is a central place to keep those reports. So I would encourage you, in whatever you volunteer, whatever your organization is, to make sure that if you're reporting that Childline report to a supervisor or a designated person, I would encourage you to follow up and make sure that report is made.
Well, can I jump in here
Sure.
on that? I mean, the reason for the changes in the law is because there's no longer that step of reporting to the supervisor. You have to also report yourself. So if
Absolutely.
you're reporting to the supervisor, it's because you've made the report and you're doing it simultaneously.
Right.
So that's important to understand.
And some volunteers, again, in our faith-based communities, have said, no, we want pastor to make the report. And the same thing as Gladys said. I think sometimes it falls through the cracks, and we certainly sort of hit home with that, make the report. When we get a child, an abuse report at the Y, sometimes we make 4 reports. If the mother is the client and is disclosed to the counselor, the child is in with the children's counselor, discloses, child goes out and plays with a toy, and I overhear that child, and then multiple reports can be made on one incident. And we've had some sad situations here in Harrisburg where a teacher did not believe the child and did not make the report, and the child disclosed to someone else. And that person made the report, and you know, it's not our job to, I believe every child. I just believe, I don't think a child really fabricates anything. They might get the time of day wrong, they might get the color of the shirt wrong, but a child is not going to disclose abuse and there's not some truth to it. Believe the child and make the report. We still have, and as Gladys said, we still have some trying very hard in some of our rural populations to take away that chain of command, or that in a school or in a daycare or in a church, and they're very hesitant. We sort of pound and pound that, but you know, again, we're protecting children. This is not something where we're going to get in trouble. We're trying to make the child's life better. Make the report. Okay. A mandated reporter shall make a report of suspected child abuse if they have reasonable cause to suspect. That's huge. Reasonable cause to suspect. You don't have to see it. The child does not have to disclose it to you. If you see a child who is limping that wasn't limping the day before, and you say, hey, what's going on with you? You do not say, what's wrong with you? Hey, tell me a little bit about what happened to you.
I think.
Oh, okay, all right.
It's an open line.
Oh, okay, so.
We didn't, I should.
Okay, no, that's fine. I
think
just wanted to,
somebody's
what was
from
I
their
doing
house.
wrong here? Okay.
Somebody's at their house probably.
Okay. So I think that,
We wasn't worried.
Yeah, because it's getting a little.
I sort of like that.
No, it's getting a little.
And you know, to some people with this new law, it makes them a little leery. I really like it. I think it's opened the door and made it better. If you have a reasonable cause to suspect, you make the child line report. The mandated reporter comes into contact with the child in the course of employment, occupation, practice, or profession through any regularly scheduled program, activity, or service. All librarians are now mandated reporters. We've done the whole Dauphin County Library system because they have regularly scheduled activities. Okay, where are we? An individual 14 years of age or older makes a specific disclosure to the reporter that they have committed child abuse. Does that make sense? Okay. Somebody at the age of 15 comes to you and says, I didn't mean to, but while I was babysitting, I touched my cousin inappropriately. Guess what? Make the report. First-hand observation of abuse is not required. You don't have to see it, you don't have to know it. If somebody discloses to you, you have to make the report. I said, you're in the grocery line and your neighbor says it's got to be specific. It's not going to be, I think the little boy down the street, you know, who I don't know who he is, that's a different story. You know, a name and an act, you have to make that report. Okay, here we go. Reporting child abuse or neglect. You're the mandated reporter, you suspect abuse, you make the call to Childline. The bottom part, I think I explained that before, don't worry about it. Child Protective Services are for perpetrators, don't worry about it. Law enforcement offenders. Childline will always either include law enforcement, or if the police get the call, they make it to Childline. Your obligation is to make it to Childline, the 800 number or online. Please, that highlighted in blue up there is really important. You are not an interviewer. All you're doing is receiving what the child is saying to you. Don't probe. Don't, what color was this? Where were you? What no. Just get, there are times. No, forget that. Okay. There are times when I have made a mandated report that all I know is the child's first name and the school they go to. Don't make anything up. They will ask you lots of questions. Are there drug and alcohol in the house? All you say is, I have no knowledge. Who else is there? Is there an aunt or an uncle? I have no knowledge. Other children, are they being abused? I have no knowledge. All you're going to do is say what was said to you, and it might be very minimal. Okay, the first step in helping abused or neglected children is learning to recognize the signs. And I'm going to go through these, I hope. Am I okay with time? I know, okay. I like this one, number one. I really do. Extreme and unexplainable changes in behavior. Next one, please. That is, we talked about this a little bit before, withdrawn, detached, excessive fear, hypervigilance, responsiveness to, you know, the door slams in the classroom and the child turns and is agitated. I like the next two, I think, are really important. Changes in sleeping. Parents will tell us this, frequent nightmares. Changes in school performance, attendance, and personality. The child that is pretty happy that you see, and within weeks or a month is very sad, doesn't want to go to school, is afraid to go. Those are things you're going to be able to see, and pretty much might be in your face. You see a really change in behavior. Okay. These are risk-taking behaviors, obviously, and they're general indicators of abuse, and they're pretty severe: running away, truancy, substance use, discipline issues, self-harming behaviors, cutting, carrying a weapon. We don't, at the very end, sometimes we'll see some of these behaviors, but hopefully we've caught that abuse before we've gotten to this point.
Mary Ann, I'm Gail from Williamsport. I have a question about bullying.
Okay?
Does that factor into any of this?
It does if it impairs the child or it causes the child to have a physical ailment. Bullying in itself, no, sad to say. It doesn't mean, for example, child comes home or child is around you and says, I get sick every morning because, I throw up because I hate to go to school because somebody is bothering me. Different story. Okay, that's a whole different story. We don't get that too often. A child that says, I don't like Susan because she picks on me is not a mandated report, unfortunately. But if it ends up to become a physical problem or a mental problem, different story. Does that make sense to you?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Indicators of bodily injury. I really like this list also because it's what we see a lot, unfortunately. Unexplained bruises or welts, burns, some days you just wish you could do something and make everything good, right? But we do get a lot of children with burn marks, repeated injuries, or the next one, various stages of injuries. You see a child and they have a cut on their arm, and 2 days later it's healing, but then there's another bruise underneath that's yellow. Different stages of healing, multiple bruises, neglected or untreated injuries. Again, you think, well, I would notice that. You might not. A child is just going to hold its arm like this, and you say straighten it, and they can't. Hey, what happened to you? The last one, we do see that a lot in schools and our daycares and even at the YWCA, where it's a beautiful day, it's 90 degrees, and the child has a sweatshirt on, has a hoodie on, has long pants on, has boots. They might be covering bruises. May not be, but if you see that pattern, there's probably something going on with that child. Okay. Indicators of sexual abuse. Sexually acting out. I know this is probably a little distasteful, but we do have children in schools openly masturbating. There's a problem. There's something going on with that child. Privately, that's a different story, but we've seen that even in our daycares, or parents will tell us that, gee, there's something wrong, that, my child is 7 and she's sucking her thumb or wants a baby bottle, or, obviously an STD or a bladder infection can also be part of the problem. But I think the regression and behavior changes in children is huge. Okay. Indicate. Yeah.
What do you see on a daily basis?
Yeah, and that's why, for me and for those of us and Gladys and all of us here that work with children, this is a good thing. Please don't view this as, I don't want to do this, it's paperwork. Just do it. You'll feel so good that maybe you've made a change. Indicators of serious physical neglect, some of these, inadequate weight gain, delays in physical development, persistent hunger. We're not talking about the child that is hungry at 10 o'clock. We're talking the child comes to school and he's hungry or she's hungry. And there's a new study out that when children are hungry, that's all they think about all day long, is that they're hungry, they want to eat. Lack of hygiene, personal care. We're not talking about coming from gym class or the playground in we're saying it's a severe body odor. Consistently soiled clothing, untreated physical problems, medical conditions, lack of supervision. The last one, deprivation of food, water, heat, and shelter. The only time that I was aware of this, it was a rural community, and I say kudos to the school, the principal, the nurse. There were 3 little girls that came to school and, had lunch and were clean and all the above. They noticed near the end of the month, this was a pattern, that they came with a bag of crackers, their clothes were soiled, they knew there probably wasn't soap, and the school nurse, called the parents, and they were on a well and a budget plan, so their electricity and their water sort of shut off about the 28th of the month. And the school got together, and it ended very nicely, sort of got a fund together. But again, I'm not saying you have to investigate, but kudos to the school that realized, boy, there's a change, there's something, these kids are great, 25 days out of the month, but the last 3 or 4 days. So sometimes it's just a simple inquiry so that you don't have to make that child line report. Not that you should do that, but, I think that's a good example. Okay. There are 3 possible results. One is that it's unfounded. Okay, there's not enough evidence. The second one is that I'm going to say indicated, and that is that there's enough evidence. I think we'll move forward. The one we like is founded. Absolutely, there is child abuse. I will tell you that a lot of the time when I make a mandated report, it is sometimes unfounded or indicated. Doesn't stop me. Just keep making those reports. Penalties for failure. Resolve any doubt in favor of reporting. As Gladys said, we talked about the Jerry Sandusky. I'm not here to blame or to say who didn't do what, who didn't, who did. Bottom line is, make the report. Okay, multiple reports. You've got a principal that says, and it's been a hard sell since January with some institutions, I want to make sure I do it. Well, yeah, but what if you forget? So make the report. It's your duty and your obligation now to make the mandated report. Where am I? Why don't children tell? This to me is sad but true. When I first started doing this work, I really got tired of self-esteem. If you have good self-esteem, good self-image, you'll be great. It's very true. Children that just, I did something wrong, it's my fault. It is never, ever, ever the child's fault. And I think you have to reiterate that. We do every day. A child comes to us, discloses, or we're aware of something going on. Sometimes children aren't aware even that it's inappropriate that somebody should do that to them. Isolation, threats, confusion. I like the children are taught to trust and obey adults. That fear of not being believed is huge. And as soon as you put doubt into a child, they will recant. A child comes to you and says, we're going to visit my relatives. I don't like to go there because I sleep in the bed and they touch me. Oh, really? Are you sure that's what happens? As soon as you ask that question, that child is going, he doesn't believe me, she doesn't believe me. Let the child talk and make the child line report. Sometimes even in, sad to say, in family situations, there is doubt and there is not confusion as much, but are you sure you want to say that? Because Uncle Joe's, I don't know his name, Joe here. Uncle Joe's a nice guy. He takes us all to the baseball game. Oh, okay. Make the report. Believe the child and make the report. Reporting abuse gives victims a voice. If you take away nothing from this, or when we do this 2- and 3-hour training, we repeat that over and over and over. Make sure you believe don't make sure, believe the child. Make the report, you'll feel good. Okay, I think we're close to being done. Do I have one more? Right. Questions, Pennsylvania child abuse. If you have any questions on trainings or anything else, please feel free here in Dauphin County to call the 1-800 number, the YWCA. I know in Williamsport you have a YWCA, Think Wise Options. So please go to your agencies that can help you, that can encourage you, that can do any of the above. Make the report. Any questions, concerns? comments? Yes,
You said that we are now mandated reporters,
yes.
and we got that by virtue of listening to you for the last 40 minutes.
No.
Okay, how did we get that?
You may call Y and I will give you the 2 to 2.5 hour full training and you will get a certificate.
That wasn't his
Oh,
question.
no?
No, but then, without having received the 2.5-hour training, I'm
Right.
still a mandated reporter.
Yeah, by
Yes,
statute.
by statute,
By
yes.
statute.
Because you're acting in a volunteer role.
Okay, that's it then. If I'm acting in a volunteer role dealing with kids, then I become a mandated reporter.
Correct.
Okay, because what I'm wondering about is some of the other people in my organization who are not here now, but if they're there on Saturday morning when the kids show up,
Right.
they're mandated reporters.
Right.
On a regular basis, direct contact with the child, yes.
Okay.
That's what we were going through, yeah.
And Gladys explained to me, because all our volunteers, we do have to give them a mandated reporter. I mean, we do it for free,
Mhm.
but they need that certificate for dealing with children in our shelter or transition. So really, I was not aware, and I was glad to hear that volunteers, you know, you're mandated reporter, but you don't have to take the 2 to 3 hour training. Am I right on that?
What I got from the information is that for volunteers, it's not required, but
Okay.
strongly encouraged.
Okay.
Recommended, because you have all these different questions, and because you have nonprofit organizations that, you know, they're just going around doing business of their organization, so it's very important, and that's why there's all these resources that are available. And if you look at even in Curslife, there's additional websites that you can go to, and even I said that there's a website, there's several websites you can go to that will give you the training online, that's free.
Right.
And so it helps your organization, and it helps people know also, not only do they get the certificate from the Department of Human Services and the Pennsylvania State Police, but then they have a certificate of online training or something like that. So you can have all those different areas and avenues to be able to train your people and get better understanding as, so when they ask the question, why am I a mandated reporter? The law requires you to be, and let's get you more information so you have a better understanding.
So,
And here is the resource that Gladys shared online, training available. There's in-person training
Right.
with folks that you have that certificate to be able to get
Right,
that
right,
training.
right.
Online, as Gladys said, it's strongly encouraged, and this link is on the PowerPoint that I'll share. The University of Pittsburgh, that is an online training.
I guess I'm a little confused then, so that if anybody who's working with kids is a mandated reporter, who's a permissive reporter?
Anyone else?
Well, what she was, what they were saying originally, that if, say you are, as she stated, in the grocery store, and you see, or someone says to you, you're a permissive reporter, in the sense of, you should go and report. But in terms of the direct contact with children, that's where they drew the line for mandatory reporter. Because it was a concern to make a blanket, everyone in the world is a mandated reporter. That was a concern.
So basically, anybody who gets any of the certifications that we were talking about when we first came here
Anyone who's required to get those certifications.
is a,
Mandated reporter. Right.
thank you.
And training is encouraged for you as a volunteer.
Right.
If you're an employee, you need.
And you're a licensed
Yeah.
individual or something like that, yeah.
Just so you know, I'm training this month, next month in November, all the funeral directors in the state, all the pharmacists in the state pharmacy association. So, you know, are they mandated reporters? Yes. You know, but they also see it as an opportunity, I hope, that now they have the training, now they're a mandated reporter, and they will make those reports. So it's really opening up, and as Gladys said, we're not talking about anyone on the street, but people, you know, they've expanded that whole list of mandated reporter training.
There are several online trainings we've talked about. The slides that we have here, are they proprietary to the YWCA?
No, but they're just, you may take them. This that I went over today is about, a quarter of what I trained.
Okay.
So, you know, you can certainly take this and.
You're willing to let us use, like I was gonna just segment it out, your whole portion I can post online
Sure.
and share,
Sure,
okay.
yeah. There'll be.
And same for, I thought.
Right, yeah. There'll be
Thank you.
about, I think we charge $1,000 for that, but. I really would encourage anyone, if you need this training, I would certainly be very willing to provide it, and try to condense it, give you the certificate. It's a 2-hour training. The old one was 3 hours. I would be happy to do that if that helps. I learned better with what we're doing, and just what Gladys did. I learned a lot. If I have to go online, sometimes that doesn't quite hit me, but if you're you know, that's fine, or at least to condense it down, and I can sign the certificate and you're good to go.
Are there any questions, other questions from the Williamsport crew?
I don't necessarily have a question, so maybe just a little clarification or a comment. So, I'm a volunteer, and I'm not a paid employee. Am I mandated or am I permissive?
You're mandated if you have the you're mandated if you have the requirements where you're, you know, supervising under the children are under your control, you have direct contact with them.
Let me put it this way, we have Sunday school teachers that are now mandated reporters.
Right.
Okay, they're volunteers, they see the
Right.
children, you know, an hour a week or whatever.
Right.
They are now a mandated reporter.
But the issue is direct contact with the child. If you're a volunteer in a senior citizen's home,
Right.
I was just gonna ask that
Right.
question, if you see something abusive.
well,
That's
they
permissive.
have, okay. Were you about to ask a question in terms of use of what, in senior citizen home or?
Yes.
Okay, and there's different laws for that, you know, that's elder abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that's not what we're talking about today.
Right. I go to a nursing home all the time,
Right.
to visit, so.
Right, yeah.
I see.
Pam, does that help?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to, you know, just do a little bit of, I don't know, clarification or
Sure.
just respect that we're, you know, kind of focusing on volunteers as opposed to paid employees.
Right.
The slide I just put up, it says as we've been emphasizing, any adults volunteer who is responsible for the care, supervision, guidance, or control of children and has routine interaction with children. That needs to get the clearances, which are now called certifications, the 2. And then, some type of training is
Strongly encouraged.
strongly encouraged, is the term. I know.
Thank you, yeah.
Okay, if there are any other questions, I didn't see any submitted from our folks that are, joining us webinar style. Would anyone, that is webinar at their home have a question for us? Anyone wanna jump in? Okay, we're going to draw this to a close.
We have one question in Williamsport.
Okay, go ahead.
Is the, webinar something we can check and refer to?
Can you please repeat that?
Is the webinar something you'll be able to go back to, or no?
We did record it, actually, so we are gonna see about posting it online. I just wanted to make sure about Mary Ann's piece, I knew, she's gonna allow us to do that. So, we're gonna post it online, and we're gonna send out some information to our partners. And like as we said, we ourselves, we are very lucky to have had experts join us with Gladys Brown's experience, with Gail, with Mary Ann and her background. We're learning because you are all partners, serving families, serving children. We have Dave Lloyd and Donna from our youth program. They're helping and they're the conduit to help to keep kids safe. So it takes a village of experts for us to learn, and it takes a village of people to really take care of the children, and that's really what the focus is, to really, when in doubt, make that call, to really, protect our children is really what we wanna do. So we thank everyone for their participation, for their questions. We thank everyone here, for being here in Williamsport and at home. All right, we're gonna continue on. We wanna give everyone, I know it's a little bit heavy topic that we had, but like, as we said, knowledge is really important, and, taking care of our children is the utmost importance. Feeding them, but also, protecting them, in all that they do. So we wanna give everybody a round of applause. Thank you so much. We're gonna have folks, do an evaluation here, and if anyone has any questions, we'll do shameless plugs for the conference coming up in September 24th. Help yourself to coffee and drinks. I'm gonna stop the recording of the webinar. All right. Thank you, Pam. This is now.
Okay. You want me to do it?
No.
Okay.
Marianne, you have to go, right?
Yes, I'm sorry.
All these things like that, when you get all of these clearances,
It's nice to see you. I'll see Joey.
Marianne, hold on one second.
but there's still.
This is a flash drive for Rhonda.
Okay.
And this is a thank you for.
Oh, thank you very much. I
And
sure will. Oh, that's very nice of you. Thank you. If you need anything else, let us know.
Okay, thank you so much.
Or anything we can do, just give us a call.
All right, thank you.
It's just kind of frustrating when you think about all background checks and things, and it's still, it's not
I
like they
don't
put
think
this
they are
together.
trained to do it, but there is a one there, with domestic violence. Where you train, but they need one up there where, to help, cause I think it's better one-on-one, at least that's how I am aware.
Absolutely.
I know. Yeah, it doesn't come in, but,
It's kind of
right.
work out an agreement, confidential agreement that the person would resign and then they would go out. So it's like the school district saying, oh, they're out of our school, but then that allowed the person to have a free clearance in terms of there's nothing in the criminal background, then they can go to another school. And then there's something in place now in terms of law that I think went into effect last year that would prohibit the schools from going into
Well, we
entering into
charge
confidential
$500
agreement.
training, but
So
we would.
none of that can
Yeah,
stop
but
what you have been doing recently
No, I
with
don't. But let me put my name and
teacher that
telephone
has
number
some
down.
relations
And the
out
only
there.
reason that I don't